Good afternoon, everybody. Here we are on a Friday afternoon, thinking about the beach, but not being allowed to go to the beach. So instead, we've got Kyle Goetsch here, who's going to talk to us about starscapes and night photography, etc. So completely different to what we're seeing outside right now. I think what's going to be really exciting is to sort of see the star trails and Milky Way panoramas, all of the cool stuff that he's put out. Looking at some basic gear, hints and tips. I'm certainly looking forward to it. I'm not sure I'm really wanting to hear that I have to get up at 4:30 to be on my roof.
You mean 2 a.m.? What's 4:30?
Okay. All right, it's getting worse. but I certainly want to know what time is the best time, etc. Yeah, so I'm going to hand over to you and look forward to your talk. I know my wife is also logging in. She's been so keen to see your images for the last couple of days. So yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Always enjoy engaging with the photographic community in South Africa. I think it's a lot of fun. I think we've got some great photographers here in South Africa, and they're admired around the world. And we have some of the best locations, especially for astrophotography and landscape photography. Okay, so let me pop up my presentation quickly. Okay, can you all see a screen that says astrophotography?
Perfect. Yeah, with some beautiful liquid clouds down at the bottom by Table Mountain.
Am I small in the top corner? Sorry, I'm not sure if people can see me or not.
Yeah, okay, yeah, you're small in the corner, yeah.
Okay. So during the presentation, while I'm talking, if you want to ask any questions or if you have any comments or anything, please write them in the Facebook Live. Quentin will ask some of them if they're relevant to what I'm talking about, and I'll look at them afterwards and I'll address them. I'm also going to ask you guys some questions, so if you're happy to respond, I love to engage with you guys. Generally, when I do talks, they're normally live, and I get to engage with the audience, and it's a lot of fun, and we chat about astrophotography, and we normally go off cuff quite a lot. But I'll try and stick to the script, and I'll try and keep it under at least 3 hours today.
There we go. Sounds perfect. I've got a bit of water here. Got some snacks. We sorted.
I've got my teas. I'm ready.
Yeah, fantastic.
Are the guys logged on or they're online?
Yeah. We're all there, starting to climb on now.
Okay, perfect. Just a little disclaimer up front. All the images you see in the presentation are mine, unless I state otherwise that they belong to other people. I do credit if I use other people's photos. I put their names up. Please go and support them as well. Not only my photos are great, other people also take great photos. So please support the whole community. So generally when we talk about nightscapes or astrophotography, I sort of have grouped it into sort of 4 camps of people. There's sort of the guys that will take something that's foreground heavy and has a little bit of stars in the background or the moon. And it's a photo just taken at night, such as the car trail in the top left there. Or guys that try and just take pictures of the moon with their telephoto lenses, and that's I've sort of put in a star moon category. And then we have guys who do star trails, and they focus on the star trails. And then we have the Milky Way, which is very popular, especially in South Africa. We have excellent skies for Milky Way. And that's where a lot of you, so if I ask you, what have you attempted? And if you type it in and it pops up, I think most of you will fall into that sort of Milky Way, stars, moon. And then some of you will have attempted star trails. And then we have the more advanced sort of astrophotographers who do the deep space stuff. And that requires a little bit of specialized equipment to shoot the deep space photos. So I'm going to touch on all of these.
I've got a guy in Mauritius who does the deep space stuff with the telescope and all sorts. Yeah. And it's absolutely amazing. I definitely want to get some of his images on as well, because it's not your typical sort of Milky Way, etc. It's like the nebula and all of those things. And exactly. It's absolutely amazing.
And the reason I've put it on here under this astrophotography talk is because the equipment to actually take these pictures is becoming more and more accessible. And I'll talk about that when I get to that slide. So if you look at the picture at the bottom right, that's by Alex de Kock. He's a South African photographer, and he uses a star tracker to take these images. And he uses the normal equipment. He doesn't use a telescope. He uses his 300mm lens or his 200mm lens with his camera with the star tracker, and you can take pictures like that. So it is becoming more accessible to people, and that's kind of why I've put it in. but it's a bit more on the technical side of the astrophotography. So it's normally for the more advanced photographer who's progressed maybe past these first 3 levels. Okay, so we all enjoy seeing pictures of the Milky Way. These are a few photographers that I follow that are in the astrophotography community or on the Facebook groups. They're always posting. And I put this all up, even put mine in there, snuck it in there. And what we love about these pictures is they're just so unique and they're so colorful and they're so beautiful. But I think the first thing you notice when you see, once I put all these pictures in this on the board here like this, is there's quite a big difference in color between the pictures. And normally I'd ask now, why do you think that is? And I'm going to tell you why that is. So guys ask, what color is the Milky Way? You know, I see a picture, sometimes it's purple, sometimes it's warmer, sometimes it's a cooler tone. You know, how do I know what color the Milky Way is? And that comes down to really two key things, and that I will talk about is the atmosphere, what's in our atmosphere, as well as editing. What is our editing preference? What is our white balance preference? So what color is the Milky Way? According to space.com and astronomy.com on their websites, it's been classified as the color of fresh spring snow in the early morning. Very interesting article on National Geographic about the Milky Way and the color of it. And the color is derived, obviously, in the name Milky Way. It is the color of milk. So it's a whitish, off-whitish, milky color. And that's the color of the Milky Way. That's not necessarily the color of the galaxies and the nebulas and the planets. Those have different chemical compositions, and those will have some color. But generally, the milky part of the Milky Way is a white color. So if that's so, then why do we see all these purples and greens and all these other colors? Well, we're asking the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, what color is our night sky? What are we shooting through? What is that atmosphere we are shooting through before we see the Milky Way? And there are a lot of things in our atmosphere that create color that we will detect with our camera sensors. I think the most obvious is the first one, light pollution. If we shoot and we have a little town or some lights off by some buildings, we generally get quite an orange glow off of the horizon, and that gives us quite a warm tone. Then we have aerosols. These necessarily don't create a lot of color, but create a haze in our image, and that haze bounces off color. So other things that are creating color will bounce off of that haze in our atmosphere and create different types of color. Then the zodiacal light. This is generally a pre-dawn. I haven't captured a picture of this before. Friends of mine have. It's really cool to see. You get almost like this bluey gray, like light streak coming out of the horizon. Very cool to witness. And that can introduce some color as well. Airglow. I don't know if any of you have seen airglow before. I've seen it shooting locally in the Western Cape and in Namibia about 3 or 4 times, and probably twice where it was really, really bright. And I'll show you pictures of that later on. But basically, this is excited atoms in the upper atmosphere. They create really intense and saturated colors and range from greens, reds, oranges, yellows, pinks, and blues. The one that's probably the most predominant with the airglow is sort of an orangey yellow color. And I've seen green as well before. And then we all know the aurora borealis, the northern lights, just get some southern lights. So the guys shooting in the northern hemisphere with their Milky Way shots can get a lot of those colors coming in with the greens and blues and the pinks and that from the aurora borealis. And then the planets themselves. I mean, Mars is red, Jupiter's yellow. The vast majority of stars aren't blue. They are red, orange, and yellow. So we're not getting a lot of that cooler temperature actually coming from outer space. And then post-processing. So post-processing is, there seems to be a greater degree, a greater creative license with post-processing for Milky Way photos. And I think this is because we all know if you take a picture in the day, the sky is blue, the sun is orange, and it's quite difficult to get away from that. But at night, we can't absorb all that light. So we're relying on that sensor, that longer exposure to pick up more light detail. And that gives us a little bit more creative license to go for the cooler tones or the warmer tones, or, you know, for a little bit more of our personal preference for the edits. If we were shooting in like a really cold condition, it was snowing, we wouldn't want to show it as a warm color. We'd want to reflect that environment and maybe cool the tones down a little bit. So those are the two key things, and that's why you'll see a lot of differences in people's edits with the Milky Way and why there is a big difference in color. You'll see it in my own pictures. Sometimes I've edited pictures slightly cooler because I know I have a lot of haze and light pollution that's just orange and looks muddy and ugly. So I've cooled it down a little bit just to bring out the Milky Way and just balance the image a little bit more. Okay. Quickly going to take you through the different types of images. For the guys that have never shot astrophotography before, there are a lot more options that you have in terms of shooting. You don't just take a single image of the Milky Way and there you go. There are a lot of different things now you can start playing around with that you wouldn't necessarily use in your daytime or landscape photography. You can, but you tend to use it a little bit more with the nighttime images. So a single image, that's quite explanatory. Panorama, I'm going to go through, and I'm going to go through each of these and show you examples. I'm not going to stick on them too much now, but what I want you to get from this slide is that you can start to get variations of these. So you could have a blended stacked composites or a panorama blend where you shoot a panorama and then you blend in the Milky Way that you expose correctly for, and then the foreground that you expose a different time for. And I'm going to go through how all these work. But with the nightscapes photography, you can start to get very creative in your technical side and editing side of your photography, if you enjoy doing that. So the single image is quite self-explanatory. It's a single exposure. Normally guys use this for direct Milky Way photos. You generally have a silhouetted photo, as in this image here, with a windmill with the Milky Way above, a single image. For single images, the better your equipment, the better your lenses, generally the better your image is going to be at low light. And when to use this is really anytime you want to take a picture of the Milky Way. It's really great when you have really dark skies, you get really nice clear images. With a single image, it's quite nice to go with a wide angle lens. The wider your lens is, the more of the image you can get in. And you need to use a low f-stop to pick up all that light. So a single image, that's just taking a picture of the Milky Way. I've put on all my pictures sort of where I've taken them and roughly the times that I've taken them. I haven't put on the settings, and I haven't done that purposefully. We will get to the point where I talk on settings. And this is a point where a lot of people ask you, I don't know if you get this, Quincy, what settings did you take that at? What settings did you do? And those of us that know that's not how photography works, especially for astro. Your lens, you have to calculate your time for star shift, and that depends on your focal length with your lens. So every lens, every different focal length is going to have a different exposure time. Every lens is potentially going to have a different aperture and can go to a different aperture point. So you adjust accordingly to the equipment you have. So just copying my settings is not going to get you the same image, and the light conditions and the light pollution is going to be different. So I don't like to tell people my settings if I know that they're asking me to try and copy them. So I purposefully left those off, and I will show you how to take a picture, and I'll show you what rules and little examples you can use to set up your own equipment instead of copying other guys' equipment.
Yeah, I think the thing with the settings, you get it across all the genres of photography. People say that the Sunny 16 for shooting outside, etc. And I think probably the best way to tackle it is to have it as a, well, this is where you need to start, but then depending on your lens and your sensor and how bright it is outside, etc., go for it from there. And I think that's probably the best way to tackle it.
No, perfect. And that's how I've got it, yeah. So I'll give you guys a way to start, how to do the calculations, and then from there you will adapt and adjust to the environmental conditions.
Of course, also then the exact GPS coordinates so that we can go back and recreate that shot, yeah?
You can see my locations are very general. The Cedarburg.
It's the secret hidden locations.
Panoramas, those are, I think most of you have attempted on this talk probably some form of a landscape image and have attempted some type of a panoramic photo. I'm just going to give you a little tip specifically for shooting at night. What's quite nice is if you shoot in portrait mode for your panorama, because it's nice to keep a little bit of your foreground in each photo. So if you look at my row across the top, you'll see I've kept the foreground in each photo. And this makes it a lot easier for the software to grab onto reference points in each image and stitch it together. When you start shooting just in the sky, it becomes very difficult, especially for Lightroom or Photoshop, to grab onto stars unless it's really, really distinct and match them up. And then you need to use more advanced software like PTGUI, which is for panoramic stitching. And then you can specify the reference points. So if you can, try and keep a little bit of your foreground in each image when you're starting out, and this just makes it much easier for the software to grab the reference points. Also, when you're shooting at night, try and keep at least a 40% to 50% overlap between images. So if you look at my images at the top, I have quite a big overlap between each image. And that's just to help the software, again, grab onto those reference points. And try and keep your horizon straight. It's a bit more difficult at night to level up your horizon. You're in the dark, you've moved to a location. But it's the bit more straighter you can get it, the better it is. For this, you don't have to use, when you would shoot a panoramas, you don't have to use a super wide lens. So if you're shooting with your 20mm or 24mm, I shoot a lot with a 24mm, and I'll do panoramas because I want a high resolution image. It's better than to shoot a panorama and get the image. And if you want to shoot the Milky Way arch and you want to get that whole arch shape, you generally, even if you're quite wide, are going to have to shoot at least 2 or 3 images to get the whole arch in. This is just an example of getting the whole arch in. I think this was a 3x4, so 12 images, 4 across, and then 4 up, and then 4 across the top, and then that was stitched in just in Lightroom, and then I edited in Photoshop a little bit. That was in the Cedarburg.
And that light pollution, is that obviously from a town nearby or a bigger city nearby?
So that at the bottom left, I think, is probably Ceres that we're picking up there a little bit. Okay, so this is a method for the guys that are shooting with more your entry-level camera gear. If you're using your crop sensor, and especially then if you're using a kit lens, if you're using anything that's like f4, I would highly recommend you do stacked images. And this is because you're shooting at f4, you can't drop your aperture down, you can't let in more light, and so you're going to shoot at a really high ISO. And your image is going to be quite grainy. And I think a lot of you who've tried to attempt astro, maybe with using a kit lens, you'll find your images are very grainy. So to get away with that is you take a stacked image. And all this is you just take the same photo over and over again in a row. I recommend between 7 and 30. You'll just have to play around. It depends on the light pollution and what your ISO is. Some guys I know do 200 images and stack them together. And what happens with the stacked image is the software basically aligns all those images together, and any pixel that's the same across all those images it keeps, and any image that's not, any pixel, sorry, that's not the same, it kicks out, and that's your grain. So it's going to keep all your Milky Way, all the stars, everything in, and it's going to kick out a lot of that grain. I say basic Photoshop knowledge. I think today you don't need to understand Photoshop to be able to use it. I think there are enough tutorials on YouTube. You can open a tutorial up. They'll take you through step by step, open your pictures, click on this, click on that, and you can stack your image without really having to think too much about it. So if you're able to take multiple images and then use the stack method, just look up a tutorial on YouTube, and it'll take you through how to stack your images together. And the software will auto-align. So don't worry about the star shift. It'll auto-align your images and then stack them together. So guys using kit lenses, anything f4 and above, I would say try use a stacked image method. Okay, next one I'm going to talk about is just blended images. And this is if you want to see any detail in your foreground. So instead of just having a silhouetted foreground and you've got a nicely exposed Milky Way, as in the picture in the top right, you'll see I shot the picture on the left-hand side slightly longer at 2 minutes at a much lower ISO so that I could get more detail in my foreground, but I've blown out the Milky Way. And then the image on the right I've shot for the Milky Way, and the foreground is almost completely black. And then what you do is you take these two images, you blend them together, and again, exactly the same thing. Just use a Photoshop tutorial, just follow it, it tells you how to do it. And I get this image at the bottom. And you can see I've taken the foreground from the image on the left, and the sky, Milky Way, from the image on the right. And this method just allows you to bring out some detail in your foreground, and so you can see what's happening. There are other ways you can do it. You can do light painting, and I'm going to cover that section a little bit later. I do prefer the blended method. I don't do it that often, but I think it looks a little bit more natural. This blend is terrible. I just wanted you to see that you can distinctly see the two separate images in the blend, so that you can see it comes from two different images. You can blend this a lot better and make it look a little bit more natural. So this is a blend. This is slightly different from a composite, and I'll show you now why, but a blend is generally the same time at the same location. And you've just shot at two different exposures, one for the foreground and one for the sky. And it's how the scene would naturally be represented if you were there at that time. Just you're able to see more because you've exposed it for longer. Okay, now I'm just gonna talk a little bit on composites. So composite image, the difference now between the blend and the composite is generally the blend is either using a different image that you blended in from a different time point, or a different image from a different location. And I'm going to give you examples of both of those. So if you look at this picture at the top, it's a famous plane wreck in Iceland. And this image was shot by Matthias Christensen. And he went to Iceland, basically. He shot the plane wreck, but it was overcast and he couldn't see the Milky Way. And then he traveled in his trip. He went to Portugal somewhere and he took a photo of the Milky Way and he blended the two images together. So that's a composite image. It has a foreground from Iceland and it has a sky from Portugal. Very nice image, but it's a composite that he has used. And I don't have any problems with composites as long as guys say up front that they've used a composite. Sometimes if they don't, it can be a little misleading because you think that that shot was taken in a single frame and you try and recreate it and you can't, and you get frustrated and it seems like you've been misled by the person. So I think as long as guys are upfront with what they're doing, I have no problem with them, and these images that come out are really stunning. This one here by Hannes, I hope I'm saying surname right, Nietzsche, is an image I love, and it's something I've never attempted, but I do want to attempt soon, maybe when we get out of lockdown. So what he did was he found a really nice location. If you look at the image on the left, he set up and he took a picture when the golden light was just hitting the top of the mountains, took another picture at blue hour to get the detail in his foreground at a low ISO. And then he waited for the Milky Way to rise and he took a picture of the Milky Way. Then he blended all three of these images together and he got the really nice image that you see on the right. This is still a composite, even though he hasn't moved his tripod, it's at the same location. But what he has done is he's introduced light elements that would never be found naturally occurring at the same time. So he has the light from sunset that he's blended into his foreground, and it looks really nice, but you would never have that light lighting the mountain at the same time as seeing the Milky Way. Yeah, so, you know, doing this type of imagery, it looks really nice, it's really great. This is up to you, and this is just using your own artistic license. Okay, I've put time lapses in here just because this is made up of a multiple series of images. I'm just going to show you a little time lapse at the bottom I took in February at Wolfberg Arch. Time lapses are great. They look amazing and they are really time consuming and quite difficult to get right. So this little 10-second video that I have over here, I'll just play it again for you, is roughly 280 images, and it took me roughly 3 hours to shoot that. And that's continuous shooting, one shot after each other. There are some calculators you can use. I have a calculator in the center, top of the screen, and you can plug in, you want your clip length to be 15 seconds. Your event duration is 3 hours, and you want to have a final frame rate of 24 frames per second or 25 frames per second, depending on what country you're in. And your file size is roughly 25 megabytes. So you have a shooting interval of 30 seconds, you need to take 360 photos, and you have a final memory usage of about 9 gigs. So it does all the maths for you, so you know you have the right SD card, you know how many photos you have to set up for. So that is very time consuming, and then you have to obviously go and process it afterwards to get a really 10 to 15 second time lapse. So it's a lot of big commitment for a sort of smallish return on a reward, I suppose. What is nice is you can use the individual images that you use to do the time lapse with and edit those and use those as single images as well. So definitely try a time lapse. I'd recommend if you go for several nights, then set one night aside to shoot time lapse, or if you finish shooting the Milky Way earlier on in the evening, set up your time lapse, go to bed and let it run through the night. That's generally what I do. Just make sure that you have a charged battery in and you're not near any light pollution. If cars drive past or you have planes and that can interfere. And also look at the weather. You don't want the clouds to come in now and cover the Milky Way as well. You do need, I think you can make a video in Photoshop, but the specialized equipment software such as LRT Time-Lapse Pro, and this you can get on a trial, I think, for a month. That's really great, and that's what I use, and that gets rid of a lot of the flickering. It really helps put your image together, and you can actually edit your images, and it brings that through into your time lapse as well. Okay, so when to use? Yep.
Just a question. Robin is asking, were those shooting stars in that clip?
I think so. I think some of them are, and I think the ones right near the end are satellites. So I think the first ones are shooting stars, those now, and then right at the end, those I think are satellites that are flying past.
Cool.
And I think they're going to be a lot more satellites they're launching. So it's going to be harder and harder to actually get clear skies to do time lapses.
And then Hamish says, or just asks, you use LRT, LR time-lapse. Is that the app?
Yeah, so it's LRT time-lapse. It's got it at the bottom on the left. I think it's on version 5 now. And I think you get a 3-month subscription. So if you've shot a time-lapse, maybe shoot 1 or 2 or 3 and then get the free subscription and make all your time-lapses.
Cool. I'll put a link in the discussion.
Sure. Okay, I'm just going to touch on the tracked image, and the reason I said earlier is because this is becoming more accessible to people. These little devices that compensate for the rotation of the Earth, I think you can get them now for about 5,000 or 6,000 Rand. So it's definitely a lot more accessible to photographers. They're quite small. You can pack it in your camera bag. They do require a large sort of knowledge base before using them. They're quite technical to set up and align, and knowing what type of images and how many you need to take with dark frames and bias frames and light frames. It comes a little bit technical. So as I said, this is more for the technical side of things. But for example, so these are shot by Alex de Kock. The images on the right, you can see his Facebook page, CPT Photography. He does a lot of this night sky stuff. It's really great. I go shoot with him sometimes, and we go out and have some fun in the night. So the top image, just to give you an example, he shot this with his Nikon D600, shot at a 135mm lens for 40 seconds f4, and then it gets complicated. You have to calculate how many frames you have to compensate for a lot of the different types of sensor noise and all of that you get. And I don't know any of that. You'd have to ask him about that, but I know it gets quite complicated. But it is possible, and you can learn it. So I don't want to discourage you from doing it. And this is an option if you are interested in shooting deep sky and deep sky images. I think it's a lot of fun and is a good hobby to get interested in. You don't necessarily have to use it to do the deep sky. If you get a tracker, what it can do is compensate for the Earth's rotation. So you can do a much longer exposure at a low ISO. So you can also get really nice Milky Way images using the tracker as well. Okay, so those are just the different types of images you can take, and I've just gone through that so that you can think about it. And also the reason I've done that is really think about the type of images you want to take. I put a lot of thought process behind it. For example, if I'm going to go out and shoot, and I know the Milky Way is rising at 2 a.m., I'll go out earlier because I want to shoot a star trail, and I'll shoot my star trail from, say, midnight to 1 a.m. and then set up and then do my Milky Way photo. So I can plan the whole night if I'm away in the Cedarburg and take different images. And I know, okay, the Milky Way is going to rise. I want to do it over this rock or over this tree, and then it's going to come over, and then I want to do the whole arch shot. So you can plan different types of images based on how the Milky Way moves beforehand and know what time to shoot those at. So it's good to do a lot of planning beforehand. I'm going to show you which apps to use to plan your Milky Way photos, and I'm going to tell you how to do that. So that is coming up.
Kyle, just a question, it's a completely newbie question because I really don't shoot this very often at all. Is there a best time of the month, sort of that you would do? Obviously, not full moon, because that would seem to be a little stupid. But I mean, is it always the 15 days away from full moon type of thing, or does it depend, you know, during the year, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to touch on that literally, I think, in the next 2 slides. So
cool. I'll shut up. That's
coming up. So if you look at, I'm just going to touch on the challenges, and the challenges are generally equipment, light pollution, environment, and then how do I manually focus in the dark, how to get rid of my star shift, and then a little bit on editing. So if you look at the bottom of the screen now, what you'll see is when our astro season is. A lot of people don't realize that we have a Milky Way season. So in the Southern Hemisphere, our Milky Way season is roughly between February and October, and it peaks between June, July in our winter. And you need to keep an eye on this because it does move around the sky. So earlier in the season, it'll be in a completely different direction to later in the season. So if you want to shoot certain types of photos, you need to be aware of when the best time in the year is. Okay. Equipment, if you've got a crop sensor, full frame sensor, don't worry, you can take beautiful Milky Way pictures with both. Don't go and try and buy a fancy camera to take Milky Way pictures. If you want to spend money to get better equipment, to get better low light, spend it on the lens. Lens is king, and you'll see why when I talk about the aperture. Tripod, essential. I got guys with 100,000 Rand camera gear. They come with this flimsy tripod. They spend half an hour trying to set it up, and they get one photo. You must be familiar with your tripod, know how to use it, know that it's stable because you're doing long exposures. Remote trigger, only if you want to do the longer exposures for the foreground. If you just want to shoot the Milky Way and do those single shot images, you don't need a remote trigger. And then spare SD cards and batteries. At night, your battery is going to deplete a lot quicker. It's colder, so always have spare batteries. Even though you think you know how long your battery lasts, always keep some spare batteries. And then the apps I'm going to go into now. So the apps for the night sky, you can use Photo Pools. That's what I use. There's a free app as well as very similar to Photo Pools called Planit, P-L-A-N-I-T, Planit. And that's the free version, works very similar to Photo Pools. And what you can do with this app is, I don't know if you can see on the image on the left, there's a lighthouse. And if you look at, there's little sort of white circles coming out of the lighthouse heading to the top of the screen. And that's your Milky Way. The bigger the white circle is, that's the core of the Milky Way. So you can plan this app in advance. You can go to next month, 2 months, 3 months down the line. You can put a pin on the location you want to go to, and you can look and see which way the Milky Way is going to be facing. And then when you get to the location, the image on the right is you can put on the augmented reality, go in the day, and then set up, and then you can see where the Milky Way will be at what time. So, okay, at 11 o'clock, I need to be at the lighthouse to get the Milky Way rising. So use the apps, use the software. They make your life a lot easier, and you can plan from home before you actually head out. The moon is bad, and this is what you asked. I get guys still asking me, they say, oh, I'm going out to shoot astro this weekend. Do you have any tips for me? And I'm like, yes, the moon is up. And guys, there's a lot of things to think about. And sometimes you forget about simple things like, is the moon going to be up? If the moon is up, you can't shoot the Milky Way. I mean, you might see it very, very faintly, but the moon is super bright and it's very difficult. So you really have on a week on either side of new moon, but just Google it, look at the moon phases, and it'll show you when the moon rises and when the moon sets. And then you can go and shoot the Milky Way. And then clear skies. You can't have overcast or rainy skies. It is good though to go and shoot straight after a storm, so it settled down all that haze. So also keep a watch on the weather. Big storm coming in. Next few nights are normally clear. That's when you want to head out and go shoot your astrophotography. Yeah, so advanced planning is critical for astrophotography, and you can do a lot before ever heading out.
I think at the moment, with the lack of industry, the skies are certainly from where we are, the skies are incredibly clear. You know, there's not as much smog, etc. But I suppose what is it now? April, yeah, beginning of the season. Eh? I think you're based on your dates.
Yeah. So I have all my workshops are now.
Well, they were.
Anyway, yeah. So light pollution. Light pollution is bad. It's going to make your Milky Way, the detail, a lot less, but you can manage it to an extent, especially if you have the right equipment. So the image on the left, I shot at Camps Bay. You can see the Milky Way, and you can even see it with your eye very faintly. But you can see there's no detail in that image. It's very much monotone. It's a blue. You're just getting little bits of that Milky Way core coming through, but you're not getting those colors, and you're not getting that rich detail and contrast coming through. And then the image on the right, I shot near Portersville, and there you can see Portersville, the city glow at the bottom, the town glow, sorry, at the bottom coming through. So if you look at a light pollution map, and this is great to use, just lightpollutionmap.info, you can see how terrible Cape Town actually is for shooting the night sky. Cape Town is this glowing light pollution area. So you want to try and head away up to the top left of the screen. You can see Sutherland in the top corner there. You can see the Cedarburg in the top middle. You want to get away from that really bright, even away from the blue zone. You want to get into that dark gray zone. And the reason I put this up is it's not just important to get out of the light pollution area. You also want to make sure you're not facing back towards Cape Town when you're shooting. Because even though you might be in a dark area, if you point towards a light area, such as Cape Town, you're still going to get that glow on the horizon, and it's going to interfere with your picture. So make sure when you're planning your location, try and put the brightest light source behind you when you're shooting the Milky Way. And I'll show you an example of that when I show you pictures from the Wolfberg Arch, where I was in Cedarburg, and you can see the glow from Citrusdal coming through, because you can see Citrusdal in the top middle there is quite a bright dot. Okay, and then environmental things just to think about, I'm going to go through as quickly, is your lens can fog up. So if you're out shooting, especially Cedarburg, we're shooting now in winter, temperature drops, your lens can fog up. And the top left picture, top right-hand picture, you can see I'm getting a little bit of diffraction on my planets there, and that was because my lens was fogging up. So if you feel a drop in the temperature, just check your lens, make sure you wipe your lens, make sure there's no fog on your lens, otherwise it's going to interfere with your images. And the two bottom pictures are examples of air glow that I've managed to capture. This one was out near Sutherland. And if you look next to the windmill on the right, you'll see an orange sort of glow in the sky, and that's caused by air glow. And it's something, it's quite interesting to see it, because initially you think it's light pollution, and it gets confused with light pollution. But then you realize, oh, there's no towns out that way, and you can see it doesn't sit on the horizon, and it's this glow in the air. It's quite interesting to see. And then the image on the right was near Fish River Canyon in Namibia. And it's the first time I've seen green air glow. So if you look on the right-hand side, you can see a little bit of a green glow strip near the bottom mixed with orange on the left. And it's quite interesting to see. Some people think it messes up the image. I quite like it. Yeah. And that's caused by the excited atoms in the upper atmosphere. And then I think oxygen generally causes the red-orange color. I'm not sure what causes the green, which element that is. Okay, manually focusing in the dark. I'm just going to quickly go through the 3 different ways you can focus in the dark. The third one is the best method. So if you can see on the right, a lot of guys are like, I went to shoot Milky Way, all my images are out of focus. Okay, you need to learn how to focus with your manual focus. You can, number one, potentially autofocus in the daytime, set up your camera, then switch it on, click it on to manual focus and not touch it, and your camera will be in focus. But if you bump it, if you change your focal length or you move to any other area, you are screwed for the rest of the night. You can't take any more pictures because you need to refocus. The second method is you can make a mark on your infinity focus. When you focus to infinity, you make a little mark. This does work with certain lenses. It's better with other lenses. It's not great. It does work. But if you set it up, for example, at home and you make a mark and you travel to the Cedarburg where it's cooler, the air pressure is different, that infinity focus mark is going to be slightly off, and then your images might be slightly out of focus. The last method is you just put your screen onto live view mode, you zoom into your 10 times zoom, and you point it up at the sky. Point it at the brightest spot you can find. It's generally, I think it might be Jupiter's quite bright, or use one of the bright stars. You can see it when you zoom in, and it will look like the stars on the top image. So you'll get these like big circles, and then just manually focus through. And as that circle, you'll see it'll get smaller and smaller until it's a little pinprick. And if you keep focusing through, it'll get bigger again and become a big circle. And all you want to do is you just want to focus through that star until it's the smallest possible point it can be. And that's your focus point. There are other methods you can use. You can get a friend to go stand more than 200 or 300 meters away where your infinity focuses with a headlamp, and you can focus on him. That works as well. I'm generally out there alone or with one other guy, so I just focus on the stars. It does take a little bit of practice, but once you get the hang of it, it's quite easy, and it's the method I prefer and recommend to people. Okay, star shift, this is the problem we have and why we can't shoot longer exposures and why we have to have lenses with a low aperture. So the image at the top, you'll see has star shift in. This is star shift just after 60 seconds, shot with my 24mm lens. And at the bottom, you can see my image when it's nice and sharp with no star shift at 15 seconds. And this star shift is caused by the rotation of the Earth. The wider your lens, the longer time you can shoot for, the more telephoto you are, the quicker you'll pick up the star shift and the shorter time you can shoot for. There are many rules to do this. As I say, a lot of these things I'm telling you, this is what I use. This is what I found works for me. There's a rule of 600. There's a rule of 500. There are apps that can compensate for the rotation of the Earth. There's a whole bunch of things you can use. But the rule of 500 I'm just putting up, it's very simple. It's 500 divided by your focal length. And that gives you your maximum exposure time. If you're using a crop sensor, just multiply your focal length by your crop factor. So for the exposure, the example at the bottom, I'm shooting with the 24mm lens. 500 divided by 24mm gives me roughly 20 seconds. I always move down by 1/3 of a stop just so I don't get any star shift. So as I said, that number is the maximum exposure time. It's always good to just click down 1 click or 1/3 of a stop. So my maximum for my 24mm lens is 15 seconds.
And then obviously your ISO there needs to just be racked up until it's
yeah. So I'll do that now in the next slide. So for your aperture and your ISO, and this is where you'll understand why the lens is king, is what I've done in this panel of images I've shot is I've kept my focal length now, that's 24mm and 15 seconds. So all these images were shot at 15 seconds. That's my optimal shutter speed for my Astro with my lens at 24mm. And now what I've done on the left-hand side is you can see I've shot at ISO f4, 2.8, 2, and 1.4. And across the top, I've shot at ISO 1600, 3200, 6400. So all I want you to do now is just look at that bottom row, the f4 row, and that's sort of what your kit lens will be. It'll be an f4. And that's kind of the best you're going to get with the 24mm lens. So you can see now I have to shoot at ISO 6400 if I'm shooting at f4. And that's why having a lens that can let in a lot more light, that has a lower aperture number, makes a big difference in terms of your noise and grain that you can get. So I would always recommend, and I recommend this to all my clients, is at least have a lens that shoots at 2.8. 2.8 is a good number. You can get really nice shots. There are a lot of lenses out there that are at 2.8, and it's not too crazy too. I shoot my 24mm lens, the Sigma lens is a f1.4. And that lens is a prime lens. I bought that lens specifically to shoot astrophotography. So for me, that's a specialized lens that I use. And you can see I can shoot almost at ISO 1600 at 1.4. So if you're shooting with a 2.8, you can, depending on the light conditions around you, can get away with shooting roughly ISO 3200. And then sometimes if there's light pollution that you have to bump it up to 6400. But if you can shoot it at 2.8, with ISO 3200, that's generally a good place to start. So you want to try and keep in that sort of middle range This I'm not going to go through too much here because I don't think you guys are going to see the grain on your screens on Facebook Live. But all this is just showing you is that as you increase your aperture and you can't shoot at a lower aperture, your ISO increases grain. But software is really good at getting rid of grain, especially today. We can get rid of a lot of that grain. So don't worry too much if you are shooting at ISO 6400. So this is a slide I want you guys to remember, especially if you've never shot Astro before. Your exposure, rule of 500, and then just a third of a stop less. So just one click of your exposure wheel down from that number. Aperture as low as possible, and then ISO between 1600 and 6400 when you're starting, and that's dependent on those first two settings. And then you can change your white balance if you want to. I sometimes change it to a cooler white balance when I'm shooting, and that's because I can visually see the image a little bit better than if it's warm. But if you're shooting in RAW, which it should all be for your Astro, it doesn't matter. You can just change it afterwards in post. So you can shoot in auto and you can make it cooler afterwards. So those are the basic settings when you're starting out that I think you should learn and you should use and apply to your astrophotography. But as I said, these are general settings. Once you're out there and shooting, depending on your environmental conditions and the shot you want to take, you will adjust from this. But this is a good starting point. Okay, star trails. So sort of something a bit more interesting. Not that Milky Way isn't interesting, but star trails are a little bit more fun as it's sort of the next level guys jump onto after they shoot the Milky Way. There really are two different ways of doing this. There are other ways, but these are the two most preferred ways, and that's using a single image where you open up your shutter for 15, 20 minutes and you take a single image, or you take multiple images in a row and you stack them together and use a software to create the star trail for you. So I've got examples of both of these. If you look at the top two images, the one on the left is a single image and that's shot for 40 minutes. And the one on the right is a stacked image shot for an hour, and that's 106 images that I put together for that. If you're using the single image method, you will need to turn on your long exposure noise reduction, or you need to take a dark frame. And if you don't know what that is, then just ignore it for now. Just turn on your long exposure noise reduction. I don't have the time to go into the dark frame at this point. The guys who know what dark frames are will know what that is. But if you're shooting a single image, you need to turn on your long exposure noise reduction on. And what this will do is this will take a second image after your 40-minute exposure, and it will take another 40-minute image, which is just a dark frame, and that subtracts all the noise and the sensor noise and hot pixels from that first image. So if you shoot for 15 minutes with long exposure noise reduction on, your camera will take a second image for 15 minutes. It'll be the same time as the first image. So that's why guys don't like to use the single image method, because if you do a 30-minute image, you have to wait 30 minutes before you can use your camera again. You just got to sit in the dark for 30 minutes and wait. But I do like the single images. I find it gives a much cleaner image. It's a little bit softer. I like the look of the single image over the stacked image, but it's also a lot riskier, the single image. If a car drives past, if someone turns a headlamp on, that image is ruined and you have to start again. So it is a lot riskier. The tracked images, you can kick out one frame. If someone turned the lights off, you can just kick out that 1/32 frame and your image is still okay and you're okay. In terms of stitching those together, I don't know if you want to put this up, there's a software, free software called Star Stacks, and that you just plug in all your images and that puts it all together. It's really easy. You don't have to think about it. It's not complicated at all. You import all the images, you click run, and it gives you your star trail. So that's called Star Stacks. That's the one I use, and that's what I used for these stacked images in the slide. Yeah, so there's just another example of one I did now in February at Wolfberg Arch. I did a single image, 45 minutes. I just want to make a disclaimer. Don't open your sensor for more than like 45 minutes. That's like max. Your sensor can overheat. I only do mine for 45 minutes if it's really cold and I'm outside in the cold and I know Sensor is going to be fine. Your sensor normally, all on new cameras, will have a built-in security heat sensor. So if it's going to overheat, it will switch off. So the risk is fairly low, but you don't want to open it up for an hour or an hour and a half. You can risk some damage to your sensor. So just so you guys do know that there is some risk if you go too long. Generally, guys will do a star trail with a single exposure between 20 minutes to about 40 minutes is good to get nice rotation. So this is, I was pushing it to the max, 45 minutes, and I got this really nice rotation over the Wolfberg Arch in February. And then you can see citrus dull light pollution in the bottom there at the back, how that comes in and affects the image. Okay, light painting. I don't do a lot of light painting just because it's really difficult to get right. You really have to spend a lot of time, very subtle light painting, so you can get it so it doesn't look like you've shone a light on something. So I don't do a lot of light painting. I do it with some clients because they enjoy it, and I enjoy playing around with it, but I don't do a lot of it for myself, just because I like to capture that, the essence of what's happening at night, as opposed to artificially lighting up the foreground. But with light painting, just try and be as subtle as possible. Use indirect light. So if you have a headlamp, point it backwards and just pick up that faint glow of the lights just on the edge. Be very subtle with it. Try not to point your beam directly onto the images. These are just 3 examples that to give you an example. So in the top one, you can see I've used my light in the foreground and it lights up the foreground. But if your scene is too far away from you, it's quite difficult to light up those rocks at the back, and you end up that you can't evenly light up your scene. So it is quite difficult to get right. And then what I did in the image below that is then I hid my headlamp behind a rock and I just lit up some of those rocks. And I like that a lot more. It can be very subtle light lighting up those rocks. And then with images on the right, you can shine your headlamp into the sky and you can get images of you contemplating life while you point out at the sky. And this is where I played around with a little bit more subtle light painting. I had hit a light behind the rock at Wolfberg Arch, and I quite like this. It just lit up the arch, gave it a little bit more of a warmer tone and balanced that with the cooler tone of the Milky Way. Okay, editing, challenges on editing. If you're shooting nightscapes, you are definitely going to need to do some type of editing to your astrophotography. It is an aspect of photography that does require you to pull out a lot of that raw information, your raw file, and play around with it to see the different elements that you've captured. If you look at the image at the bottom left, that's quite a dark image, and the reason it's quite dark is my friend was on the top there and he was shining his light beam into the sky. And I just wanted to put this image in just to show you how much information you can actually pull out of your raw file. So I just edited this file in Lightroom and I pulled it out to what you see on the right. So that's a single image and that's the information I was able to just pull out. The foreground is quite grainy. It's not the ideal. I would maybe have shot a second image at a lower ISO and a longer exposure and blended that into the foreground so it wasn't grainy. But I wanted to show in this tutorial, and you can see this tutorial of how I edited the image from the one on the left to the one on the right on my YouTube channel, short little video on how I did that. And I just wanted to show you in this thing how you can pull out a lot more information in the editing process. So even if you look at your image and you think it's dark, you can pull out a lot more information than you think. And then this is also a tutorial on my YouTube channel. You can look at that. This is just for the panorama stitching. A lot of you, when you stitch your panoramas initially, will get something that looks like the image on the right. It's very warped, and that's normal. That is normal for your astro panorama. Sometimes the software likes to straighten the Milky Way. So the Milky Way might be straight, and then it pulls your horizon up skew like a smiley face, and that's fine. And I'll show you in that tutorial how to straighten that and get the image at the bottom. So sometimes you stitch images together, you think, I can't use this, why isn't my horizon straight? There are easy ways to fix it. Okay, and just finally, find something to pursue as in astrophotography. If you want to get that star trail, if you want to shoot that particular shot, think about what you want to shoot and then pursue it. Go out, look at the right conditions, plan it. Sometimes I plan shots for next year, February, because I know the Milky Way will be in the right spot on that day at that time, and I plan that shot. And maybe it's overcast and I have to do it again the next year, but have those shots planned. An example of a little project I'm working on at the moment, just in my spare time, is I'm shooting the Milky Way over iconic South African landmarks. So I have the Milky Way over Lion's Head in Camps Bay, have the Milky Way over Hout Bay, have the Milky Way over the Cape Agulhas shipwreck, have the Milky Way, this is close to home for me, over Kochel Bay with some bioluminescence in the ocean on the right. That's also quite special to see if you haven't seen that. Have the Milky Way over Wolfberg Arch, have the Milky Way over Hole in the Wall. And the one I'm currently trying to attempt is the Milky Way over Table Mountain. It is possible. It's very difficult. This is my best attempt. And my problem is the light pollution on the left from southern suburbs. So I'm just waiting for some low fog to come in or some load shedding. And I want to try and attempt to get this picture. But it's good. Like many times I'll go out and I'll sit in cloud or fog and you never get the shot. But pursue those photos you want to get. And the harder it is to get, the more rewarding it is when you get it. Yeah, and that's it from me. I offer workshops around South Africa where I do a lot of astrophotography workshops. I've got some coming up in August in the Cedarburg, and those are going to be great. I also go to Quiver Tree Forest and we shoot astro, and I teach you guys how to take the photos, and we look at different compositions and all of them. We have a lot of fun, a lot of wine. It's a great party. Anyway, so that's it from me. Hope you enjoyed that.
That sounds like an interesting combination: wine and the technicalities of photography and timing and afters, etc.
You have to be warm at night.
I love it. So yeah, I think the one thing that you obviously need to do is just ask Eskom for a schedule of load shedding around about the time when the the Milky Way would be perfect. I'm sure they can organize something like that.
You basically need like just the southern suburbs to go off for just 20 minutes. 20 minutes. That's all I'm asking.
I think a well-worded letter to them, I think, would go down well. I think
a lot of guys try and use that Earth hour once a year from, I think it's 8 o'clock, and they try and get out and take some photos, and everyone turns their lights off.
That's funny. All right, so I just want to turn that off there. Okay, so there's one or two questions coming up here. Tony Leroy is saying, is it worthwhile removing the infrared filter from a spare camera for astrophotography?
Yeah, so what he's touching on is you can specially modify your camera to get pick up better colors and detail in the Milky Way and see different wavelengths. If you have a spare camera and you are fine with doing that, I'd say go for it, because you definitely are going to get different pictures and much nicer pictures. You're going to pick up a lot more detail. Is it worth it in terms of, you're still going to get really nice Milky Way shots without doing it? I think rather than doing that, if you don't want to waste a whole camera for that specific reason, is just travel to locations that are darker and have cleaner skies, such as Sutherland. Namibia is the best I've seen with great foregrounds, and it's close to us. It's not far. The Northern Cape is also great. So, I think you can get really, really nice Milky Way shots without having to do that. But if you want to and you got a spare camera, I mean, it's definitely going to give you some interesting photos and some cool photos.
Absolutely. I can just imagine with the dunes in the foreground. That must be pretty incredible.
I was supposed to be going there in June, and I want to talk about it.
Yeah, it will be fine. I'm just having a look here at. Hamish wants to know, how do you stop the fogging of your lenses as it gets colder? Do you just have to check it and just keep wiping it?
Yeah, look. So generally in South Africa, we don't really have this problem. You're going to find it maybe if we're shooting in June, July, August, and you're up in the Cedarburg or in the Drakensberg or somewhere, and it does drop quite a lot. And then you can just wipe it. It will continue to fog up. So a lot of the Northern Hemisphere guys, they use specialized electric warmers that you put over your lens, and it keeps it warm. You do get those gel packs. You can break those hand warmers, those temporary ones, and you can put that over your lens, so that all helps. You can put a buff over your lens as well. Just be careful you don't go out of focus. So the other things you can do, I find it doesn't happen that often that it warrants me having to spend money on it. I just make sure I wipe it. And then put your lens hood. The lens hood makes initially the biggest difference. So shoot with your lens hood on as well.
And then Robin is saying that this was great. She's going to check out your tours to Sutherland. So you've got one person that's going to be joining you there. Yeah, Peter's saying thanks, Kyle. Interesting presentation. Yeah, and I think that's
cool.
That looks about where we were just before Facebook will kill us. I don't know, maybe it'll carry on. But I wanted to just say, just in a sort of a wrap up there, I really appreciate your time and showing us your images. I think, I'm not sure that I'll get up at 2 o'clock, but if I am awake at some point in the dark hours, I'm going to run up and climb onto the garage roof and point my camera into the sky and see what happens. You never know. But I think definitely a trip to Sutherland or somewhere far away from the city lights, is on the cards, because I see these images and I just think, damn, so beautiful. And I think it's the same with everything. The more you practice and try them, the easier it gets to do, and also you learn from the mistakes you make. So
I mean, I'm not a morning person at all, but I'll tell you something. If you hike up a mountain, especially we have here in Cape Town, if you hike up Table Mountain or up by Lion's Head at 2 in the morning, and you sit up there on top of the mountain, make some coffee, shoot the Milky Way, and then watch the sunrise, you will get up at 2 a.m. to do that. It's a magical experience to do with no one else around. It's really great.
I'm just going to say experience. That at that time in the morning, it is not morning. Morning is when the sun comes up.
Also, the burglars are sleeping at that time, so it's also a lot safer to go out tonight.
Very good point. Very good point. Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll point some guys in your direction, and maybe I'll join you as well on one of your workshops. Thank you very much.
Sounds great. Cool, man.
Cheers, Kyle. Bye.
Cheers.